Y a-t-il une littérature assez grande pour qu'on l'excuse d'entraîner le rejet et l'ostracisme dont sont victimes les personnes différentes? Personnes qui, dans un autre espace-temps, pourraient être vous ou moi.
Deconstructing Gender, Lawrence Anyways, the narrative and the mise-en-scene of a transition. In 2013, Xavier Dolan presented his third full-length film, Lawrence Anyways. The movie is set in the 90s and narrates the history of a man, Lawrence, who in the course of 10 years accomplishes the transition to become the woman he was meant to be. The film is interwoven between the vicissitudes, difficulties, and emotional pains of his transformation, taking as a transverse axis his relation with Fred, with whom difficulties are the center of the plot. Although we can scrutinize the cinematographic, aesthetic, and narrative elements that the movie offers us, this story forces us to involve other disciplines, to establish a dialogue between the cinematographic theory and gender studies, between art and social sciences, between art and humanism, because it's the exploration of that what makes us human beings, and is perhaps one of the most pertinent and starting points. This article will look closely at the interiority of Lawrence as a human being, his deep and complicated love relationship, the suffering that for someone like him represents life, the tension that he experiments for being in a body that he doesn't recognize, for transforming it, and for questioning the sex-gender desire system in which he doesn't have a place. In other words, we wonder in what way the movie, Lawrence Anyways, proposes a representation of the transgression to the gender normativity in an aesthetic narrative and plot dimension by an analysis of the non-hegemonic performativity of gender. The first part will center in the question of the binary order and the break of the normative, made both by the movie and by Lawrence. The second part approaches the transformation of the order by other performativities. In both, the essential issue is the definition and performance of gender, identity, and representation. Part 1. The question of the binary order and the break of the regulation. The order and the question of an order. In 1990, Judith Butler publishes Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, considered the foundational book of queer theory and pioneer in the development of a gender performativity theory. As his authoress, it indicates in the preface of the 1999 edition, I sought to counter those views that made presumptions about the limits and propriety of gender and restricted the meaning of gender to receive notions of masculinity and femininity. Butler questions the idea of the gender as constructed in the correspondence with sex and desire, and also questions the naturalness of the sex and the body. In other words, this means that the sex is a social product which is affected by gender normativity. This is to say that the body is only known by its gender appearance and through a social imaginary. Butler distinguishes between the material dimensions of the body and the process by which the body carries cultural meanings. The previous to affirm that the body is always an incarnation of possibilities simultaneously determined and circumscribed by the historical convention. She stated, consider that there is a sedimentation of gender norms that produces the peculiar phenomenon of a natural sex, or a real woman, or any number of prevalent and compelling social fictions, and that this is a sedimentation that over time has produced a set of corporeal styles which, in rafted form, appear as the natural configuration of bodies into sexes which exist in a binary relation to one another. Besides denaturalizing the idea of sex, Butler emphasizes that gender is not a fact but a repetition of acts instituted by the estilization of the body and enforced through certain modes of punishment and rewards. Hereby, Butler breaks the naturalized correspondence between sex and gender, and she continues, gender is, thus, a construction that regularly conceals its genesis. The authors of gender become entranced by their own fictions, whereby the construction compels one's belief in its necessary and naturalness. In this way, masculinity and femininity ideals are constructed, ideals configured as allegedly heterosexual, which suggests an alignment between sex, gender, and desire. Now then, departing from Lawrence's story, what does it mean to transcend that alignment between sex-gender desire? Not only because Lawrence doesn't recognize the materiality of his body and intervenes in it in order to transform it, but also because he doesn't execute the distinction of gender according to his body materiality, and also because even as a woman in a man's body, he feels attracted by Fred. How does the society react and handle the situation? The other and the look. Butler's work proposes a discussion on the other, that is unintelligible, illegible, impossible, unrealizable, unreal, illegitimate, inhuman, and incoherent, that doesn't fit into the dominant codes and order. It is also a reflection on power relations because there is an implicit division between what is acceptable and what is not. This implies that in certain cases the other is not considered as a human being, and the other's life is not considered worth of being lived, being wept, being felt. At last, it is a question about the panic that the unthinkable generates. We might say that the first sequence of the movie, supported by a non-diegetic music, stages the society's regard to Lawrence. The first sequence is composed by foregrounds of young people, women, mothers, elders. They look directly to the camera and they seem to follow Lawrence as she is walking in front of them. We can identify a similar sequence after Lawrence's first appearance dressed as a woman at school. Lawrence crosses the halls of the school and a subjective camera captures the fixed looks of the students and teachers. Once again, those looks follow him, although in this opportunity there is a middle ground. Short and raccourci shots, both scenes stage the look to the different and illegible from the normative genre codes. The movie is fulfilled with stylistic and aesthetic choices that connote by analogy the social horrors to which the different is submitted. We identify, for example, references to the classic art. One of these occurs when Lawrence writes in the blackboard, "Ex homo," after he is fired from the school. The paintings that refer to the moment of Jesus' crucifixion are usually identified with this expression. Lawrence writes these words after being crucified by the school council for his gender-sex conversion, for being different. In the same way, we can observe the images of grotesque paintings. An example, horrible faces who seem to be judging after Lawrence was hit by a man in the bar for looking different while walking through the street looking for help. Even though perhaps the scene that more explicitly shows the tense relation between the society and what is different occurs at the restaurant, the waitresses who is attending them says,
Vous savez, on en voit beaucoup dans la rue. Des fois, ce métier, elles vont ensemble. Au petit couple, ça doit faire ses forces à la beach.
Fred stands up and answers.
C'est de grosse vache!
Ben voyons, mademoiselle, on peut-tu rester poignées?
On a-tu gardé le cochon ensemble, toi puis moi? C'est quoi ces questions-là de colon sale, de mangeur de marde?
Ben, je suis curieuse. C'est normal que je m'intéresse. Hey!
Tu marches-tu dans mes bottes, toi, Chris? T'envies-tu ma vie? Non, je te permets pas de rentrer dans notre vie puis de poser des questions. T'as aucun droit sur moi. Tu n'as pas le droit.
This is one of those sequences where the film seems to address directly to his audience, as its narrative, Fred's speech, more than its aesthetics, puts the spectator facing what comes as a furious and wary response to the pressure Lawrence and Fred are facing all through Lawrence's transformation. The recognition of the difference. The present time in the movie is their interview to Lawrence in Montreal in 1999. The movie is narrated in a not linear way, and it is the interview the one that spins such circularity. The movie finishes with the beginning of the story that is about to tell, the time in which Fred and Lawrence met back in 1987, and it begins moments before the interview with the journalist that marks the end of the story that unfolds the movie. An example, the culmination of the relationship between Lawrence and Fred, and Lawrence's accomplished transition into a woman. That's why we can affirm that the AC woman, Fred, and their relationship is the best vehicle to mobilize his journey to transformation. Throughout the movie, Lawrence and the journalist have an interaction that comes and goes between cordiality and rebuff. In most part of the film, this conversation occurs exclusively in voice-off. The spectator can only hear them speak and narrate. The woman, elegant and refined, has an attitude towards Lawrence that seems to represent what a Western conventional and conservative spectator feels towards such a discord with the normativity Lawrence embodies. In the last part of the film, it is understood that during part of the interview, the journalist did not dare to look at Lawrence in the eyes. She didn't admit her through the inclusion of the sight, which supposes being aware of the presence and existence of someone else. Even if she's respectful, it is clear her discomfort, her bewilderment, and curiosity. This snub seems to happen at the beginning of the conversation, and the reconciliation seems to have place not long after Lawrence and the journalist meet, although it is shown at the end of the film. The film positions this character as a mirror of the spectator. In other words, the viewer is the interviewer, as it is not only throughout her that we find out what happened, but also she asks what the spectator wonders. And the mise-en-scene reinforces this illusion because Lawrence looks directly at the camera when she is talking to her. So it seems that she is directly talking to the spectator, us. The viewer is placed on the skin of the journalist through the camera. Lawrence is facing the camera, looking at us, winking at us, and after hearing the entire story, we are obliged to accept the existence of his difference when the woman agrees to look at him into her eyes. The film seems to say at this point, these almost 3 hours of film should not be in vain. You should now understand that the difference exists, acknowledge it, and that gender norms are as ridiculous as the idea of an exclusively binary world. At this point, it is pertinent to go back to the subject of the look. After being questioned by Lawrence about not looking at her directly, the journalist says,
Ça vous importe, les regards?
Bah, et vous? Vous avez besoin d'air pour respirer, non?
This phrase shows the need for recognition by the look, to recognize it's different, and if it is admitted under a consistent look, marginalization fades out. In other words, the look is important because we're not accepting the difference when trying to do it without seeing it, without looking at it, by ignoring it. It is only really accepted when viewed and acknowledged. Another important mise-en-scene of this argument is the relationship between Lawrence and her mother. She, at first, partially accepts Lawrence's announcement about his transition, but warns him that her door will be closed whenever he is dressed as a woman. For example, after being dismissed by the board and after the violent fight at the bar, Lawrence calls his mother on the phone asking for help. His mother tells him she cannot leave the house. Lawrence insists on a meeting, but she refuses to see him as a woman. However, over time the relationship changes. At a meeting in a cafe by 1995, the mother tells Lawrence, "I never saw you as my son, but I can tell you that I see you as my daughter now." This change demonstrates the final recognition of the difference and its acknowledgement.
Par contre, j'ai l'impression que t'es ma fille.
Part 2. Other performativities to transform the order. The political character of gender. By deconstructing sex and gender, Butler introduces a political character in her theory because she undoes and redefines the restrictive normative concepts of sexuality and gender, because she thinks the gender beyond the masculine, feminine binaries, because she reformulates the question about the human, because she refers to the existence of real people that experience the rejection and the violence for being different. An example, their sexual orientation, because she opens up a gap for social transformation. Gender norms are subjected to renegotiation since they are unstable and depend on an stylized repetition of acts. There is a prevalent violence against LGBTI community around the world. For instance, as Martinez Hernandez refers in Colombia from 2006 until today, 433 cases have been reported. This includes situations as homicides, sexual violence, intrafamiliar violence, threats, forced displacement, and forced disappearances. This frames us in another way of understanding power and power relations. Power does not limit to coercion or physical repression, because it also encompasses the production of meanings, of subjects, of species, of orders, of identities, and of representations. Hereby, power becomes manifest in the representation and also by imposing a determined organization of the world, by categorizing the human beings, by supporting a symbolic and social order that rejects the difference, and, in consequence, Lawrence's transition to become the woman he was meant to be has to be considered as a dispute of the human being in the world, a dispute of the order of the things, in order to achieve control of one's own life and to question the normalized representations. Butler writes, "The point was not to prescribe a new gender way of life that might then serve as a model for readers of the text. Rather, the aim of the text was to open up the field of possibility for gender without dictating which kinds of possibility ought to be realized. One might wonder what use opening up possibilities finally is. But no one who has understood what it is to live in the social world as what it is impossible, illegible, unrealizable, unreal, and illegitimate is likely to pose that question." This implies producing new possibilities for experiencing gender and, according to Belgrado-Rossen, constructing a world in which people could live and breathe inside the sexuality and the gender they already live. And Bourles adds, "Gender is extramoral and it is not appropriate to speak of good or bad genders. Nevertheless, it is imperative to be careful of not falling into radical determinism or radical voluntarism. In other words, we are not totally determined because there is a margin for practices of freedom and resistance, but simultaneously we are located in a social, economic, cultural, and political context that restricts and limits the horizon of possibilities." The transition. At the end of 1989, after turning 35 years old, Lawrence confesses to Fred his real identity.
Ok, Fred, c'est pas que j'aime les hommes. C'est que je suis pas fait pour en être un et c'est différent. Hein? Tu vois, ça, c'est pas moi, ça non plus, c'est pas... Ça non plus, ça me dégoûte, c'est pas moi, ça, Fred. Ça fait 35 ans.
The first elusive image of the transition in the movie happens in the classroom. The students take an exam. Lawrence sits in front of them, and we can see on the end of each of his fingers a paperclip that emulate long nails. The journalist on the interview asked him,
"Et la transition, du jour au lendemain, ou bien lentement? Et le point de vue professionnel aussi, parce que c'est langue que je veux prioriser pour l'entrevue."
From this point, Lawrence undertakes an odyssey. The film shows the character crossing a deserted park in winter, and before a bifurcation in the way, we see him take a decision and going until the end. This is how Lawrence begins his process to change his body and his appearance. He begins to wear makeup, nail polish, to put on earrings and necklaces, to wear skirts, dresses, and heels. He begins electrolysis to eliminate the body and facial hair and to take hormones. It is in the present time of the movie, an example, the interview with the journalist and the last meeting with Fred in 1999, that we can glimpse Lawrence's complete transformation. 10 years after beginning his transition, this is the non-hegemonic performativity to which we referred to. The Five Roses and the Black Island. The film presents in two key and specific moments the possibility for its character to fit in, the possibility to belong and get out of their marginality, even if these spaces are marginal themselves. One of them is the Five Roses, a group of friends that Lawrence meets after having been injured at the bar dispute, and in addition being rejected by his mother when he asked for help and support over the telephone. The Five Roses represent in many ways the rejection to the hegemony of the gender, because it is an eccentric group of all women and drag queens who look after themselves, where none of them respects the norm. Lawrence found a great emotional support in this social group. The other space is the Black Island, a place to which Lawrence travels with Fred once they meet again in 1996, and where Lawrence hopes that when they meet with friends who are a transsexual couple, Fred conceives the possibility for them. The island represents a break from the norm and the freedom of being in a place away from the daily life, specifically the family that Fred had formed with his husband, and this sensation is reinforced by the sequence in which clothing falls down from the sky while they walk. The transgression proposed by the movie with this type of improbable sequences, clothing falling from the sky, is a clear sign of rebellion against one of the golden rules of cinema, verisimilitude. Both the Five Roses and the Black Island are places in where the difference is accepted, in where Fred and Lawrence can be a couple, in where being different is a value. Nevertheless, they are marginal. In other words, the Five Roses live in a place where it seems as if they are the only ones accepted, a place hidden from society. Throughout the movie, we do not see the Five Roses outdoors, they are always indoors. They are either in the enormous theater that shelters them and simultaneously protects them, or in Lawrence's house for the Christmas of 1995. This space might represent the safe stage where paradoxically, when they act as they really feel, they shed from this imposed mask. In the same way, the Black Island is a geographically remote place, and because it's an island, it has no frontiers and it's covered in snow. The desolation of its remoteness serves as the perfect shelter to escape, and it seems as if there are not many people living there, reinforcing the idea of a place without society. However, it seems that the freedom these people seem to enjoy in both spaces is not real. Birul states, "When referring to freedom, I am not alluding to the idea of an individual subject alone, since a subject is free to the extent that he/she is conditioned by conventions, norms, and cultural possibilities that make freedom possible, though they do not determine it. They are the conditions of possibility of freedom. Who we are as subjects of freedom depends on non-voluntary forms of connection with others. I was not only born within a series of rules or conventions that form me, but also within a series of relationships on which I depend for my survival and which constitute me as an interdependent creature in this world. The question of responsibility emerged in the context of this sociality, this interdependence. We as society must fight for a freedom where the subject is not fastened and can get out of the box if it wishes to. This without forgetting the need from the other's acknowledgement as this to build us, in example, admitting our need to exist as other admits us as existent. It is not fighting for other boxes, no matter how divergent they are from the conventional ones, because the disciplines that work to define the new boxes are power that tie us, but rather to open up all possibilities to live gender to its fullness. The movie succeeds to this extent, as they don't live at the Black Island, because this freeing acknowledgement from others is needed. The film is concerned to show this struggle, the constant back and forth between what it is and what it should be. To Fred, the isolation in which Fanny and Alexander are living is not happiness. To refuse to live there far apart also implies wanting to transform the other, but not through alienation and marginalization, but in society, and thus the importance of Lawrence's return to Montreal, the relationship he establishes with the journalist and his mother, and going out on the street being what he always wanted to be. Conclusion. Lawrence breaks the limit that her environment imposes her in order to find freedom. He says,
Écoutez, je recherche une personne qui
I
comprenne
am
ma
looking
langue,
for a
qui
person
la
who
parle.
understands my language and speaks it. A person who, without being a pariah, will question not only the right and the value of the marginalized, but also those who claim to be normal. The movie takes Lawrence to the place she wants to be, while she does everything to make her relationship with Fred resist, a relationship that, though heterosexual at the beginning, breaks the mold by turning into somehow a form of lesbian love. Lawrence transgresses the binary order and questions it with her body, because she can affect it by transforming it. Lawrence suffers, Fred suffers, her mother suffers, and not because her change towards the truth is bad, but because to the society the acceptance of the difference is difficult, especially in sexual matters. The movie does a portrait of the difficulties that represents one's change, clearly affirming the social position towards it, position that is precisely what makes it so painful and truncated. As Boulez establishes, today there are many people with modalities of gender that are considered unacceptable, the sexual or gender minorities, and who are discriminated against, considered abnormal, by the discourses of psychiatry or psychology, or who are the object of physical violence. These people are not being given the opportunity of having their life recognized as worthy of being protected or helped, not even as lives that deserve to be mourned. I question the norms of gender that prevent us or make us incapable of recognizing certain lives as being worth living, and which stop us providing the material conditions necessary for these lives to be lived, to flourish. For these lives to be publicly recognized also mean they're being misunderstood as lives whose disappearance will be felt as a loss. By stylizing a bygone era, the 90s, with flamboyant ballroom dancing scenes and sequences that look more like music video clips inlaying into its almost 3 hours of length, the film represents the tension, the blows, the fight, the tears of transition, showing that such a change is anything but pink and easy sensitizes the public on how brave and valuable Lawrence's decision is. Lawrence Anyways proposes both a aesthetically and plastic portrait of the transgression of the rule, from a character who refused to follow the binary division between men and women, male and female. Indeed, Lawrence Anyways is a film that proposes a representation of a character who transgressed the rules of gender by building her own identity as a woman. At the same time, it is important to note that Dolan's films also violates aesthetic and stylistic norms of the current mainstream cinema, proposing a sometimes unconventional treatment of verisimilitude, passing over a certain hegemony enjoyed by the dominant narrative cinema. The film is then reveled in various and complementary levels, but its value does not rest on such rebellion. It seems to have achieved the mise-en-scene of the urgent and absolute need for freedom, but the freedom that admits its condition by the societies acknowledged and institutions to exist, the freedom that seems paradoxical but viewed up close, it is not. In other words, the value of the film rests primarily on the representation it makes of the struggle for freedom of a human being on her transformation into the woman that she was destined to be. All this by putting the spectator in the obligation to see, acknowledge, and understand the painful reality that those in this condition have to go through. People who in another space-time could be you or me.